join the Navy to do or die. But we didn't do, and we didn't die. We were much too busy looking at the ocean and the sky, and what did we see? We saw the sea. We saw the Atlantic and the Pacific, but the Pacific isn't terrific, and the Atlantic isn't what it's cracked up to be.
So we have searched high and low, including all the mortuaries around. We have found Bob Hope again. So with no further ado, let's us welcome Bob Hope.
Thanks a million, Bob. All right, here we go. We're doing a tight wire act up here. How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? This is Bob, live from the Hope Hotel, Hope. Thank you very much. Let's take a walk down memory lane. We've already got plenty of traction. So as we pause to celebrate the veterans of the USS Shangri-La, we hope your smile won't be missing in action. Hey, come on up, ladies and gentlemen, it's Phyllis Miller. Hiya, Phil.
Bob is a good friend, and we just want to know, where have you been?
Well, I've been on board ship. Where have you been?
Well, I want to know where my invitation is. I like to invite just the troops.
You'd like to invite all the troops? Well, what are you going to do for the troops?
Oh, baby, they're Navy guys, aren't they?
The last time I checked.
Well, listen, you've been checking the Navy guys?
Well, when did this become the midnight show?
Ladies and gentlemen, what a wonderful, wonderful person. Please enjoy your show. God bless you.
Well, bless you. Miss Phyllis Miller, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Phyllis. All right. I just met the Pig Bagara, ladies and gentlemen. I just flew in on a wing and a prayer. I was on the wing because as a sailor, I wouldn't have a prayer. Actually, my flight was very nice, but the plane was rather old. In fact, the pilot sat behind me wearing goggles and a scarf. This plane was so old that Lindbergh's lunch was still in the seat. The fasten seatbelt sign was in Latin. To get to the washroom, you had to crawl out of the wing. But I said to get to the washroom, you had to crawl out of the wing. Well, thank you very much. But hey, I don't know about you, but I have a fear of flying that dates back to my childhood. See, when I was a baby being delivered by the stork, that blasted bird dropped me from 400 feet. He did that to stay out of the range of my father's shotgun. See, Dad already had my brothers, Eenie, Meenie, and Miney. When I came along, he didn't want no mo. I guess my fear was rather obvious. About halfway here, the pilot looks at me and he says, "Say, are you a little nervous?" I said, "Yeah, it's only my third time up." He said, "Well, that beats me. This is my first." I said, "It's a little rough out there. Don't you think we need parachutes?" He said, "Don't be silly. The ones with parachutes jumped an hour ago." Finally, the crew chief taps me on the shoulder and says, "In case of an emergency, the pilot is always the last one to leave the plane." I said, "Why tell me that?" He said, "Well, I don't want to make you nervous, but that's him down there." But we made it. And hey, I want to thank Bob Hayner for providing my transportation here today, Bob. I really enjoyed that ride over from the airport. I only fell off his handlebars twice. And you know how they sometimes give important people a motorcade with police officers on motorcycles followed by a marching band? Well, I had a Bob and we had a Cub Scout on a skateboard playing Thanks for the Memory on a harmonica. But now that I'm here, our show tonight will resemble the menu on a family dinner. We'll have some sweet warm favorites, a couple of nuts, and one big ham. But see, most people don't realize, how did I get started? Well, we'll get to that in just a minute. It's great to be here in Ohio because that's where I grew up. Grew up in Cleveland. And you know, Ohio has just gone through so many changes. I mean, there's a condominium craze here in Dayton that's affecting everybody. In school the other day, a teacher said, "Now, Johnny, what happened in 1492? He said, "How should I know? We live on the 12th floor." Okay, they can't all be gyms. But hey, how about this hotel, the Hope Hotel, named after one of my favorite movie stars. Modesty prohibits me from saying the name, but there is so much atmosphere here. All the restaurants have atmosphere. Like Packy's, talk about atmosphere. I went in there the other day for lunch. They said, "You want to sit next to a palm tree or a waterfall? You want to sit next to a balmy breeze or a babbling brook? You want to sit next to a rainstorm, firestorm, hailstorm, thunderstorm, by the parrots, hurricane, flash flood, or a volcano?" I said, "Put me by the weatherman so I'll know what's going to happen next." But say, that's what I was telling you about. Bob Hope, yours truly, grew up here in Ohio, in Cleveland. But let me just start from the beginning. I was born in England in 1903. I was the fifth of 7 brothers. In fact, that's how I learned how to dance, waiting my turn in the bathroom. My father moved the family to Cleveland when I was 3, and right away he started in. He said, "Why don't you get a job so we'll know what kind of work you're out of?" I said, "Pop, I'm going to run away from home. You hear me? I'm going to run." And he'd say, "On your mark, get set." Actually, I broke into show business at the ripe old age of 12 years old, doing a Charlie Chaplin impression in Luna Park. Shortly after that, I took up boxing. I was so enamored by Packy McFarland that I named myself Packy East, which is probably the inspiration for the name of Packy's Sports Bar. My boxing record was 3-1, 3 wins, 1 loss. And one of those wins was attributed to the fact that the other boxer didn't show up. But in spite of having the boxing name of Packy East, they called me Rembrandt because I spent so much time on the canvas. But luckily, I had an affinity for dancing and for joint vaudeville. Now, you folks know what vaudeville is. Vaudeville is an old French word meaning ham and eggs with scenery. Those were some rough days. But luckily, we had a face for radio and teamed up with NBC Radio for the next 6 decades and later television. But perhaps, and then appeared in over 60 motion pictures, most notably a series of road pictures with Bing Crosby and Dorothy Lamour. But perhaps the most important road we went down was the road to the USO. Now, we entertained the troops for 50 years, starting in the months just prior to the beginning of World War II. Now, the world has changed a lot since then. Back then, gasoline was being rationed, and even the most common items were very scarce. Today, you can have all the gas you want for, what, $4 a gallon? And people like Lady Gaga are making a dress out of leftovers. I remember that first soldier audience. I looked at them, they laughed at me. It was love at first sight. It was May 6, 1941. We went down to March Field in Riverside, California to do a radio show for the members of the Army Air Corps that were stationed there. At first, I didn't get it. I said, why are we going down there? How big's the crowd? And they said, well, I don't know, maybe 1,000? I said, 1,000? Now, folks, you heard that phrase, I'd walk a mile for a camel? I'd carry a camel a mile to hear 10 people laugh. 100 people is like a symphony to me, but 1,000 people? Sheer fantasy. I said, are you sure? 1,000? They said, well, maybe 2. I said, now let me get this straight. A captive audience of 2,000 with military police guarding the gates so no one can get out? They said, yes. So I said, yes. And it was one of the happiest yeses in my life. What a great crowd they turned out to be. In fact, they took me for a ride in one of their airplanes. Just as we were about to do a loop-de-loop, I said to the pilot, "Hey, how come you're wearing a parachute and I'm not?" He said, "Well, they need me." That was the beginning of my love for the American GI. Shortly after that, we teamed up with the USO, and we've been going steady ever since. Now, March Field went so well. 2 weeks later, we went down to the San Diego Naval Station. Oh, the Navy rolled out the red carpet. In fact, they assigned us our own ensign to show us around. Now, I know you know, but just in case we have any civilians out here tonight, an ensign, compared to the other branches, is a second lieutenant who can swim. That show for the Navy went over so well, we were held over. Yeah, held over the side of the ship. We were on a roll. Next up was a Marine Corps installation in Northern California called Camp Roberts. Now, folks, I believe all of our troops are very strong and they're very brave, but the Marine Corps prides itself in being tough. Their motto is Semper Fidelis, which means, "I feel fine, Doc, just nail it back on." Thank you very much. Those Marines at Camp Pendleton are so tough, the mosquitoes carry meat tenderizers. One thing was becoming obvious: soldiers and sailors make the greatest audiences in the world. I met one guy who told me he loved being in the Army infantry. Yeah, where else can you sleep until 4 in the morning? But one of the most fearless guys I ever met was a pilot in the U.S. Coast Guard. Now, here's the story. We were on a C-54 Skymaster going from Santa Monica, California to Hickam Field in Honolulu. Now, in case you civilians are still out there, the C-54 was an airplane with 4 propeller engines. Well, about halfway to Honolulu, the pilot looked at me and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry to tell you, we just lost our number 1 engine. This type of thing happens, but it will now delay our flight by 1 hour." About 10 minutes later, he looks at me again. He says, "Oh, I gotta tell you, we just lost our number 2 engine. Now, this type of thing happens, but it's now gonna delay our flight by 2 hours." Well, I thought for a minute and I said, "Well, say, can we afford to lose those other 2 engines?" He said, "Oh gosh, I hope not. If that happens, we might be up here all day." Thank you very much. I scraped my leg in Bizerte, Tunisia during World War II. To ward off infection, they insisted we put a bandage on it. Well, when the medic arrived, I noticed he was very young. He was extremely nervous. Well, and if I didn't know better, I think maybe this guy didn't know what he was doing. So to put his mind at ease, I started to talk to him. I said, "Young man, how did you get in here?" He said, "I was drafted." I said, "No, how did you get into the medical corps?" "I was drafted." I said, "Well, were you an intern?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, were you going to medical school?" He said, "No." So I said, "Well, please tell me, how in the world did you get assigned to be a medic?" He said, "Well, when I came in, they asked me to write down what I had done before I was in the service. I said I worked for Dr. Pepper." Here I am. Actually, he put on a very nice bandage, but on the wrong leg. Hey, let's not forget about the women of World War II. There were women that served way back then. The Navy had women accepted for voluntary emergency services, the waves. So did you hear about the wave that married an admiral? And together they had 3 little ripples. Well, that's not funny, but it's cute, right? It's cute. There was also a group called the Women's Air Service Pilots, the WASPs. They flew troops and equipment all over the continental United States and were recently awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. I flew up the West Coast with a team of WASPs. We flew 10 feet above the waves. I said to the pilot, "Hey, what's the idea?" She said, "Well, we can't fly any higher. the tail gunner's doing our laundry. But perhaps the most rowdy group we did a show for was for 3,000 members of the Women's Army Corps, the WACs. And fellas, if you were lucky, you got a date with one of those gals. And over in Europe, during those nighttime air raid alerts, that could get very interesting. No, I mean, you haven't lived till you've taken a whack out in a blackout with a flak out. I was married, so I had to back out. We would play wherever the troops were stationed. We did one show so close to enemy lines, if you made an exit stage left, you got captured. Thank you very much. The coldest show we ever did was in Thule, Greenland, 750 miles north of the Arctic Circle. At showtime, they told me it was 36 below. Below what? I don't know, because my thermometer went AWOL. And those soldiers get lonesome. In fact, anytime a lone wolf starts howling, it would start a community sing-along. I mean, one guy was so lonesome he started dating his tattoo. Yeah, don't laugh. His friends were saying, does she have a sister? But the military's always been on the cutting edge of technology. Today we have what? Tablets, Twitters, texts, tweets. And what would you do without a cell phone, am I correct? I think we take it all for granted. Now stop and think, there was a time not too long ago when the telephone was brand new. I'll bet that took some getting used to. For example, husband and wife are sitting at home and their telephone rings for the first time ever. He's closest, so he answers it. He says, hello? What? Well, I don't know. Why don't you call the Weather Bureau? Bang! Hangs up the phone. His wife said, well, who was that? He said, no, it was just some guy wanting to know if the coast was clear. Oh, hey. It's technology for you, right? My neighbor, talking about medical technology, my neighbor just had a pacemaker, a digital pacemaker for his heart. I don't know how it works, but every time he makes love to his wife, my garage door opens. That's technology. All right, let's talk about the troops some more. Now, the tradition of entertaining the troops at the holidays started in 1948 with the Berlin Airlift, Operation Vittles. I went to one of those pilots and I said, say, is it true you're risking your life twice a day? He said, nah, not since the mess hall stopped serving spam. Then on June 25th, 1950, without any advance notice, North Korea declared war on its neighbors to the south and ordered its army to cross the border between the countries, the 38th parallel. It was the North versus the South without Rhett Butler or Scarlett O'Hara. And the USO was there. I became known as the Pearl of Pyongyang. After I'd been there a couple of times, they wanted to string me up. Now, Korea was the first time the Bob Hope Show took writers along. We already had been touring with Les Brown and his band of renown for music, but we brought along some writers to write special material and to keep the jokes fresh for all the different places we'd visit. Korea might have been the most forgotten war, if not for one of the writers on our staff that came along to Korea, a guy named Larry Gelbart. Now, Larry had a very prolific career as a writer. He wrote the book to A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum on Broadway, and the screenplay to the movie Tootsie, among other things. But what Larry saw and later wrote about in Korea gave American audiences over about 10 years of some of the most compelling television in history. Because of his experience in Korea, Larry Gelbart was hired as the head writer on a TV show called MASH. It was based on the movie and book that had come out previously, but Larry's the one that had to develop it into a weekly situational comedy about the Korean War. But luckily, he had a nice touch to turn it into a bittersweet memory and gave audiences the weekly adventures of Hawkeye and Hot Lips Houlihan and Radar. If I talked to some of these veterans that served in Korea, they know it wasn't quite that way. Now, Korea was a constantly changing campaign, but the Bob Hope Show was trying to go wherever they needed a show. We go as far south as Busan and Daegu, following the 7th Infantry Division, or they go right back up north across the 38th parallel as far north as Pyongyang. Actually, we didn't want to take the show that far north, but the 1st Cavalry Division went in with such force, the suction pulled us right along with it. Now, we were doing a show at in a Army hospital in Pyongyang when we got word that the 1st Marine Division was about to invade the port of Wonsan, and they could sure use a show. So we bid everyone farewell, gassed up the plane, and started to taxi down the runway to leave. All the soldiers that had been stationed there were standing by the runway to wave and say goodbye, shivering in the cold, when one of them yelled out, "Hey, can you throw out your coats?" Turns out the Bob Hope Show cast members had been given parkas that were much warmer than the standard issue coat that a soldier was given in Korea. So we stopped the plane, and after about a 10-minute delay, threw out about 80 parkas and took off with just a minor 10-minute delay, colder but feeling a little happier for the good deed that was just done. Well, when we finally got to the port of Wonsan, as we're flying in, I noticed the harbor was full of ships. I thought, oh great, this is gonna be a big show. We landed on the airstrip right next to the harbor, and no one came to greet us. After about 5 minutes, a guy frantically drives up in a Jeep and starts motioning like this. So we taxied down the runway into a hangar, and still nobody. After about 20 more minutes, finally the top brass arrives. General Struble and Admiral Allman. Was it? Am I getting those around? Anyway, the general and the admiral showed up, and they stood there blinking at us and said, "When did you get here?" I said, "I don't know, about 20 minutes ago." "Why?" He said, "We just took the beach." There was the first time in history that the Bob Hope Show actually landed ahead of the Marines. But as fate would have it, if we hadn't stopped for 10 minutes and given away all the parkas back in Pyongyang, we might have landed in the thick of it. And some retreating member of the Korean Army might have bagged himself his first comedian. At the first that show we finally did for them that night, we please made the Marine Corps promise to land on the beaches ahead of us from now on. Now, in the early 1960s, our government began sending military advisors in large numbers to Southeast Asia. We wanted to go do a show, and they said, "Oh no, it's too risky." We tried to go again in '62, but 3 hours after we left home, the Department of Defense canceled because the situation was still too sticky. We were going to go again in '63, but two significant things happened in November of 1963. First, on November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. About a week later, the president of South Vietnam was assassinated. His name was Ngo Dinh Diem. So, based on those two very critical events, the Pentagon said there's no way you're going to Vietnam this year. Because we had established a troop to perform shows for the troops, they rerouted the itinerary to the Eastern Mediterranean. Because Greece and Turkey were locked in a dispute over the Isle of Cyprus. Well, it just so happens, anchored in the Bay of Naples was the USS Shangri-La. So on December 29, 1963, we went on board ship and really had some fun ribbing the sailors. It kind of went like this. "Hey folks, it's great to be here on the USS Crap Game." The Navy calls it Shangri-La, but I guess that only applies to the winners. I mean, I have never seen so much action. I went to a mess hall, and I went to a table in the mess hall. Even the sugar cubes had numbers on the side. And landing on an aircraft carrier was a little different, as you all know. Just in case there's any civilians out there, an arresting cable grabs you and stops the entire aircraft in a matter of feet. Boom. The pilots always loved that. They'd say, "Hey, how'd you like that landing?" I said, "I'll let you know as soon as my jockey shorts stop orbiting my neck." But actually, the show on the Shangri-La went so well that as we began to leave, I kept feeling a sharp tug at my heart. Either I'm sentimental or my girdle got caught in the catapult. The next year, it was December 15, 1964, we took off on our annual holiday tour with two major exceptions. The itinerary was classified. The military would not tell us where we were going until we got there, and the military had renamed the tour Operation Big Cheer, but we were secretly going to Vietnam. Now, because the enemy could attack at any moment, they said the soldiers in the audience would be carrying their weapon. Now, I don't know what made me more nervous, the fact that the enemy could attack or the fact that the audience was armed. After doing warm-up shows in Korea and Thailand, on Christmas Eve, 1964, we flew into a combat zone with a fighter plane escort for the first time and were rushed to the stage. Only then did we find out the first show for the 34th Tactical Group of the Military Assistance Command Vietnam was at a place called Bien Hoa. What a welcome we got at the airport. They thought I was a replacement. As we flew in, we got a 21-gun salute. 3 of them were ours. Now, everybody was just a little bit nervous to be in country, but the military said, don't worry, you're completely safe, but don't trust anybody, because the enemy could be anywhere. I woke up at my hotel the next day, there was a hand in my throat. It was mine. I lathered my face, and 3 razors reached out to shave me. At breakfast, my cereal popped, so I ran in the hallway and surrendered to the maid. The military said, no, we promise you're extremely safe, and to make me feel better about it, they kept a chicken on standby in case I needed a blood transfusion. Now, there were some bumps in the road in that first tour, but we made it out alive, so we decided to go back in '65. Now, the American military in Vietnam had grown in 1965 from around 30,000 in January to about 200,000 by year's end. On Christmas Eve, we did a show for an audience of 12,000 at Tan Son Nhut Air Base, just outside Saigon. Now, Tan Son Nhut was also known as Twitch City. Every time a Jeep would backfire, so many guys would jump in the air, you'd have to take a number to get in the landing pad. And Tan Son Nhut was just loaded with brass. You couldn't go 5 feet without saluting. I met one private who spent his entire tour of duty trying to salute his way out of the washroom. By 1966, the tour was encompassing over 25,000 miles. That's a lot of sitting, I want to tell you. I developed a soft spot for Southeast Asia, and that should tell you where it's at, too. Now, we would do shows at some top secret bases in Vietnam, like Nakhon Phanom, just across the border from Laos. Now, Nakhon Phanom was a top secret base. Oh, it had to be, because right before we got there, it said so in Time magazine. Now, life on a top secret base is a little different. At dawn, the bugler just thinks reveille, and then he tiptoes bunk to bunk and whispers, the general's up, how about you? By 1967, the American military force in Vietnam was almost 500,000. Now, whenever possible, we would like to do a show for the Tonkin Gulf Yacht Club. Now, you all know, that's the nickname given to itself by the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet. Based on the successful experience on the Shangri-La, we would set up shop usually on an aircraft carrier. And this time it would be maybe the Ticonderoga, or the John F. Kennedy, or the big whale of the fleet, the USS Midway. As we were going on, one time there was a chief petty officer who was explaining some Navy terms to a group of new recruits. He was explaining the difference between fore and aft. He said, if I am heading towards the stern, in what direction am I heading? The young man raised his hand and said, aft. CPO said, very good. If I'm now heading towards the bow, in what direction am I now heading? The young man thought for a second and said, aft backwards? Well, they can't all be Jim's, all right. There were some poignant moments too. Christmas Day, 1968, at a place called Cameron Bay. When we landed, they said, please start the show as soon as possible because this is monsoon country and rain is in the forecast. Sure enough, as soon as we started the show, it started to sprinkle. The rain got progressively worse until about halfway through a 2-hour show, it was raining pretty good. The soldiers didn't flinch, so everyone put on a hat and kept going. In fact, the only thing spared from the rain was Anne Margaret's fur coat. If you can believe it, it began to rain even harder until by the end of the show it was just a full-on downpour. Still, the soldiers didn't move. So we finished the show the way we finished every show that year. Singer Linda Bennett led everybody in a holiday sing-along. So there, in a driving rain, we all sang Silent Night together. It was the only Christmas they had, and they didn't want to miss it. Now, we had guest stars from all walks of life. Johnny Bench and Vida Blue from the baseball world. We'd have the reigning Miss World or Miss America would join the troupe. There'd be the biggest box office stars would come along. In July of 1969, another Ohioan walked on the moon, Neil Armstrong. In December of that year, he joined Operation Big Cheer. He told a group of the 34th Infantry at a place called Coochie on Christmas Day. He said, it is man's nature to explore the unknown. I said, you don't have to tell them that. They eat in the mess hall every day. And you know what? We used to kid Neil Armstrong and say, you know what, Neil, for being the first man in the moon, you're not really one of NASA's funniest. He'd say, well, Bob, some of us don't have the luxury of having our joke lines printed on giant cue cards. I said, oh, come on, Neil. Nobody likes a smart astronaut. One of the things the soldiers couldn't get enough of that was the sight of a pretty girl. So I always brought along plenty. Now, I was going to do a little song for you tonight with the reigning Miss World, but she had to cancel. So, say, is there somebody out here that could help me out? I see a lady smiling over here. Would you come up here, my dear?
Come on, Linda.
What is your name is Linda? Have a nice round for Linda, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Linda, would you like to do a little number with me tonight? Now, this is a number we did in Vietnam with Raquel Welch. Well, I think you're going to be a perfect Raquel. I got Les Brown, the band of renown, right here. Of course, it says face recognition, and it doesn't recognize me. Okay. All right. Hang in there, folks. We'll get right back to you. All right, Linda. Yeah, you know what? I'm delighted you're going to help me. Do you know why? Why? You make me feel so young. You make me feel like spring has sprung. And every time I see you grin, I'm such a happy individual. The moment that you speak, I want to go play hide and seek. Nobody will look. I want to go and bounce the moon just like a toy balloon. You and I are just like a couple of tots. I'm a tater tot running across the meadow, picking up lots of forget-me-nots. Ooh! You make me feel so young. You make me feel there are songs to be sung, bells to be rung, and a wonderful fling to be flung. Fling your flung, Linda. And even when I'm old and gray, I want to feel the way I do today, because you make me feel so young. Okay, we're going to dance now. Just follow me. Ready? Here we go. Just walk. Now kick. Walk that way. Now kick again. All right, my turn. Take it away, Linda. And even when I'm old and gray, I want to feel the way I do today, because you make me feel so young. You make me feel so young. I think I'm a kid again. You make me feel so young. I'm even getting pimples. Let's hear it for Linda, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Linda. Linda and I will be appearing next week at the Coyote Club in Springfield. No, thank you, Linda. By 1970 and 72, we were hard-pressed to find an audience with all the troop withdrawal. 1972 was the final year for the Bob Hope Show going to Vietnam. It had to be. That chicken with my blood type had died. Operation Big Cheer went to Vietnam 9 times, and each time had its own special moments and some unforgettable times with the troops. We met many courageous fighting troops from our country being baptized into guerrilla warfare, a very treacherous business. We did our show from mountainsides full of troops that lived with that murderous heat, or tasted the dust, or slogged through that jungle mud in search of a cunning and resourceful enemy. We'll never forget. How can you forget? Guys like the river rats at Dong Tan, the dust-offs at Cu Chi, the Jolly Greens and the Sandies at Nakhon Phanom, the grunts at Pleiku, all the Marines at Da Nang and Chu Lai, and all the sailors and fighter pilots on ships and carriers at Yankee Station in the South China Sea. They all met the challenge with fantastic courage and good humor. As time passed, we began to realize the reason why troops all over the world welcomed the Bob Hope Show was that we spelled out more than anything else, home. We started in the days of radio, and as the soldiers would sit, watch, and listen to the show, all of a sudden they were transported back to their own living room, sitting in front of the family's Atwater Kent radio, later television, with mom and dad, or a pesky little brother and sister, when at the time over the years they might really be in Sicily, North Africa, Guadalcanal, Seoul, the South China Sea, Saigon, Beirut, or Afghanistan. Many times when they were laughing their hardest, I could see many of them trying to hold back a tear. The final Bob Hope Show was in December of 1990 for Operation Desert Shield. Our tour included stops in the Middle East like Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, the land of brotherly love, where everyone looked like Daddy Thomas. And that was just the women. Now, my friends, if I could break character to tell you, in the 1997 Act of Congress signed by President Bill Clinton, Bob Hope was named an honorary veteran, the first civilian to receive such a citation. Upon receiving this at the age of 94, Mr. Hope said, "Of all the awards I've received in my lifetime, to now be listed among the men and women I admire the most. This is my greatest honor." My friends, it is an honor for me to remember him with you. And whenever Bob Hope walked, thank you. Whenever Bob would speak about his wartime experiences, he would generally conclude his remarks with a final thought from the Vietnam era, followed by a familiar refrain. "Yeah, well, see, it's me." Okay. It says, enter passcode, okay. It's that technology I was telling you about. All right. Come on, folks. All right. I believe we're all set to go. By 1972, troop strength had dwindled from its maximum of 500,000 to about 25,000. All those happy, smiling faces that came to see Operation Big Cheer had gone home, hopefully to be with someone they love. And for those who will never come home, may we humbly say that while they may be gone, they must never be forgotten. For my friends, we are all left with our memories, and these have been some of mine. So thanks for the memories of that first USO show tour, with troops and soldiers galore Who'd have thought in 41 we'd go from shore to shore for 50 years more? We didn't care about the weather, not the heat or the cold or the rain. It was an honor and pleasure to entertain each G.I. Joe and G.I. Jane. And thanks to you folks who have served in Korea and Vietnam, eating ration food and Spam. Here's to those who saw the shows we did for Uncle Sam. We thank you so much. With sounds of the war all around us, we did all those shows without fearing. 'Cause we knew if you kept the troops cheering, that we all could cope, 'cause we still had hope. And thanks for the memory of days of no regret. We really owe a debt to Bob and all the servicemen and every honored vet. Your bravery across the sea we never will forget. And thank you so much. My friends, until we meet again, thanks for the memory of today. Thanks, Bob.
Bill Johnson as Bob Hope.
I'm surprised.
I just got allergies in my life.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
All right, I think we'll do the 50-50. Terry?